This is the podcast for Narrate Church. Narrate Church meets every Sunday at 9 and 11 a.m. at the Grand Street Theater in Helena, Montana. For more information, visit www.narratechurch.org.
If you're a guest list, welcome. We're thrilled that you're here. We recognize, coming to church can be uncomfortable, and so in light of that, we work really hard to make it comfortable and non-intrusive. And on that note, we'd just like you to stand and give us your name and social security number. Just kidding. If you're a guest list, welcome. We're thrilled that you're here. Our bent around here is that Jesus is who he says that he is. We feel like life is at its best in him, that when we surrender and let him live through us, like that's the deal, that's the goal. And yet, the way we think of things is we love to gather and we love to scatter. And what we mean by that is we value this. We like to have fun with this. We think that this should bring levity. We think that this should challenge us, that it should be a catalyst of relationship, all kinds of great things. And yet we consistently try to remind ourselves that this is one of 7 days in the week. And so we work really hard to remind ourselves that those other 6 days are integral, that they're valuable. And quite frankly, I feel like one of the goals around here is to validate those other 6 days, to communicate. If nothing else happens on a Sunday morning for you, I hope what happens is you leave here invigorated to enter back into your everyday life and see the opportunities that maybe you didn't see this week, or maybe you saw them and just Sunday is a day of being renewed and restored and re-energized. So welcome if you're a guest. We'd love to, help you connect. And if you're someone that just kind of needs to hide, I met a couple on Friday night. They're like, I stick my foot in my mouth all the time, right? Like, hey, so you're new to Narrate? No, we've been there since like June. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. But then as I talk to them, they're like, yeah, we sit in the balcony and we sneak right out the door, and they just kind of like it that way. And so we embrace that too. Many of us have been in a place where we just needed to hide for a couple years. So if you'd like to talk to somebody, there's a table out there managed by people who know what's going on and have social skill. One of them whispered to me this morning as he was taking the offering bag from me, don't be stingy. So awesome. I love that our ushers would say that to me. Anyway, so if you're a guest, welcome. And okay, so the Christmas Eve deal, if you're part of Narrate or just learning the culture, either way, this is important. From our first Christmas Eve gatherings, we felt like if we were going to gather and celebrate the birth of Jesus, who was born to incredibly poor parents and really, really poor circumstances, that should somehow benefit the poor locally. And we just felt like that'd be an appropriate form of worship on Christmas Eve. And so over the last couple of years, we've done some creative things, or we felt like creative things in terms of mattering that way. And we did socks the first year for God's love. And then last year, we did diapers. And both years, we've given you kind of this creative mechanism by which you could deliver them. This year, very excited about the hats and gloves deal. That was a gal who's a part of the Narrate family, as you heard, who her company used to do this, and for whatever reasons, they're not anymore. And she said, I think I know how we can pick this up. And hey, Adam, you think we can do this? Yeah, that'll be awesome. And we're also, I think, might have our best delivery idea yet for it. So if you're coming to Christmas Eve service, we just encourage you to grab some hats and gloves. You don't have to, of course, and we'll give you a fun way, worshipful, I think, this year to deliver them. And if you're not going to be here and you'd like to deliver some in advance, you can do that too. Just drop them off at Guest Central or the office or whatever. Okay, so if you're a guest with us, also, you're catching us in the third week of a 4-week series that we're calling Wait. We like to think of them as conversations. And what we've been exploring for the last couple of weeks is that there's few things in life that we spend more energy trying to avoid than waiting, which is kind of ironic if you analyze that statement, like that there's few things in life that we loathe more, that we spend energy trying to avoid more than this idea of waiting, which means we spend lots of energy trying to avoid circumstances where we can't do anything. And what we've noted is that this is true whether you're driving down Montana Avenue on a Saturday afternoon, or whether you're standing in Target trying to buy your pack of Crayola crayons, or whether you're hoping to meet the person that you'll marry. Like, waiting can be torture. It's true whether someone's late for a meeting, whether you're waiting to hear back on a job interview or a doctor's visit. It's true whether you're trying to get yourself out of debt or whether you're trying to save money to pay cash for something. Like, waiting is just not an enjoyable thing. If you're a parent of young children, waiting for your children to brush their teeth can be torture. It feels like forever, right? Or maybe you're someone with babies and waiting for them to not be in diapers. That feels like an eternity. Like, waiting is something we don't enjoy. And so what we've observed over these last couple of weeks, though, is that it's unavoidable. It ranks up there with things like death. How's that for a warm, fuzzy topic? I think we can try to avoid it all we want, but like we're all going to die. That's just kind of the fact. And the fact of the matter is we're all going to wait. We're going to find ourselves in these situations where we've passed our pain threshold, And sometimes it's relative. I mean, whether you're trying to get a job or trying to meet someone to marry or trying to sell a house or trying to finish a degree or whatever it is you're doing, like you can set up these kind of arbitrary, like I could handle it to this level. And then there's moments in life where we pass our pain threshold and it becomes torture and exacting and we don't want to do it anymore. And yet we have to. Hey, Isaac, these 3 lights right here are detaching my retina from my eyeball. Could we just dial them down just a little bit? Thanks. And really, as I've thought about this waiting thing more and more, like I think that's perfect, fantastic, good job. Or maybe I should go over there and confirm. Yeah, good job. Thanks. He's going, that guy's crazy. I didn't do anything. Like sometimes we wait because we have to, right? Like sometimes we find ourselves in these situations and we're out of ideas. We're out of resources. There's nothing else we can do about it. Like our hands are tied. That can be torture. Whether that's for financial reasons or medical reasons or relationship reasons, or you're just standing in the line at Target. Like that can be terrible. Sometimes we wait in entirely different circumstances. Sometimes we don't have to wait. I think sometimes we find ourselves in a situation and we do have options. It's just that one of them's illegal, right? It's just that one of them could get us fired. It's just that one of them would bring shame on our family. It's just maybe you're a God follower, you're a God-fearer, maybe you're a Christ follower. It's just that one of them betrays what you know is Jesus' ethic. Maybe you're a person that's really conscientious about your character, your integrity. It's just that one of them betrays your integrity. I mean, let's be honest. Like if God's not going to bring along the person that you're going to marry, like you could get that done. Like you don't have to wait for God on that. Like you know where to go. You know what you need to do if you want to manipulate those circumstances. Sometimes waiting's even more torturous when it's actually not the only option we have. I mean, let's be honest, in your finances, maybe in your business, or maybe in school, like, you could do some things. You could turn some corners. Most people turn them in. Most people cut those corners anyway. You could avoid some forms. You could do some things, and you could get it done. And sometimes what makes waiting torture is your own integrity, your own desires to do the right thing, I suppose, your own desires to honor Jesus in your actions. And so really what we're exploring in this series is, well, if we're going to find times when we have to wait anyway, can we redeem that time? If we're going to have to wait, what kind of tools can we take with us into those seasons? If we're going to have to wait, is it possible that we can leave that time of waiting and actually be better, stronger, more faith-filled, a better spouse, have stronger finances, a better employee? Speaking of waiting and torture, is it finals week next week, Carol people? Oh yeah, so you're waiting to go home and waiting to get those blasted finals over. So here we go. Well, congratulations. Are you ready for your finals? I digress. They're all like, would you please stop looking at me? Okay, so I'll continue to make eye contact with the exit sign. It can be a bad deal. And so last week what we actually asked was, okay, so what's the value of this? And last week we asked this question, maybe indirectly, of maybe waiting doesn't just test our self-control, maybe it tests our faith. Like maybe waiting's about way more than self-control. Maybe it's about our faith. And what we explored last week is this idea that one of the things waiting challenges us to do is to move away from like big picture God who like will meet us at the pearly gates but doesn't really care about us getting a job or having lunch today. But maybe waiting helps us to know the God of the manna, the God who says like, hey, tomorrow I'd like to meet those needs. I'd like to be aware of those needs. And so what we explored last week is that our faith can actually grow in this season because waiting, it communicates trust. This morning, the idea that I want to explore, and we're going to go back to Matthew 4 to do it, is this idea that waiting embraces mystery. What I want to suggest to you is if you're not willing to wrestle with the unknown, if you're not willing to accept the unknown, if you have to know every detail of what's coming, that's when waiting becomes impossible. Or at least that's when it becomes exacting. That's when it becomes torture. Sometimes waiting requires that we embrace mystery. And as Christ followers, we're invited to not only embrace mystery, but embrace a God who says he's in control. He knows what's going on. Speaking of waiting and mystery, could we talk about Christmas a little bit? Christmas presents. This one is she didn't even know I was grabbing this, but it's to her nephew. How many of you will be handed a Christmas present on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day or on the 19th if you're terrible at waiting? How many of you will be handed at least one Christmas present that you know precisely what is inside of that container, that box, underneath that wrapping? Raise your hand if you'll get at least one present that you know exactly what you're getting. Come on, you're being a little reluctant. Yeah. How many of you like it that way? You prefer it that way? Yeah. All of you type A's, you can just keep your hands up for these remaining questions. How many of you will actually have been there when the item was purchased? Yeah, see? How many of you purchased it, wrapped it, and put your name on it? My grandpa did this one, or my grandma did this one. I didn't know this till I was older, but like my grandma went and she picked out her presents and she wrapped them and put her name on them and then opened them like you do and went like, oh my, it's a purse. Like, could we just like consider the irony of all this? Like, I was raised in a family where, in fact, some of our early struggles in marriage were like, you got me that? And she's just like, it's a gift, stupid, like, take it. And I'm like, well, no, I didn't want that. I wanted one of these. And we'd have some of our most gross moments around there. And so now we've almost flip-flopped where, like, I've learned to embrace her culture of surprise, and now I know everything that I'm getting for Christmas, mostly because of Amazon. Like, imagine if aliens were observing our Christmas traditions. So there's these people, and what they do is they budget money, or some of them, they don't even budget money. They just put it on their Visa card, and they ask their friends and their family, like, what do you want for Christmas? And they say, well, I want an iPod Touch. Okay, and then they go buy them those things, and then they wrap them, and then they all get together in a room, and they hand each other these gifts, and everybody acts surprised. Odd culture. I mean, I wonder if a foreign culture might say, like, what they should do is just say, like, okay, every December, we're going to spend X number of dollars buying ourselves things, and then we'll invite our family over, and they can buy themselves things, and we'll all just show each other what we bought ourselves. Like, might work out a little better, because then we wouldn't have all be at Target on the 26th going, I wanted a black one, not a white one. I wanted a medium, not a large, right? Like, I guess I just thought of that this week, and I went like, if you need more evidence that we hate waiting, like, I just submit to you the Christmas present tradition. Because I suspect it didn't start that way. Anyway, as we look at this idea of embracing mystery, in all seriousness, I'm convinced that if we're not willing to embrace the part of mystery in our theology, if we're not willing to embrace a God who doesn't always let us see every detail of the future, then what happens is something much more gross than knowing what we're getting for Christmas. That what happens in our theology, what happens in our relating to God, is we develop a relationship with God where really what we do is presume upon Him. And we present Him our ideas, and then we request that He cooperate. And not only do we request that we cooperate, but we even find verses that support our case to Him that say, hey, God, you love me, right? Yeah, I love you. Hey, God, I'm supposed to trust you, right? Yeah, you're supposed to trust me. I'm trustworthy. Okay, then do this thing, because I had an idea. Now you cooperate. I guess ultimately what I'm saying is I think that what Jesus demonstrates in Matthew 4, among other things, is that if we're not willing to embrace mystery, we put ourselves in a position where we spend a lifetime manipulating God and forcing His hand and thinking that that's the type of relationship He invited us into. To that end, I invite you to Matthew 4. If you wanted to look on your phone, we won't judge you. I promise. Someone told me a story last week after I made that comment that they were at a church recently in another part of the country, and she pulled out her iPhone, and the lady said, ma'am, would you please stop texting? And she said, I'm reading my Bible. And the lady said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And it was this, anyway, so you can use your phone if you like, or you can use this paper thing that we call a book. We're going to start in verse 1. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, if you're the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. To which Jesus said, it's written, people do not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Now, there are so many different lenses that you can view these temptations through. Fascinating different types of viewing these things. I was just reading a different one this week. But what we suggested and what we observed last week is that here Jesus is called to wait. Like he had the option. He could go meet his own needs, or he could wait for God to meet them. And so this is last week where we explored this idea that waiting communicates trust. Now verse 5, we're going to jump into 5 through 7 this week. Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. Now, what we know is that the temple stood about 200 feet tall. So Jesus is up there with the tempter. We don't know how he got there. Did he walk there? Was it like Star Wars and and they just kind of showed up on top of there? Some scholars even suggest that this was just a vision, that it wasn't an actual deal, and I'm not sure that it really matters. But what the scene here is Jesus and Satan, of course, are standing on the top of the temple, and they're looking down on the courtyard, because really the temple is in many ways a gated community. I mean, there's a building inside there, but there's lots of just open space where things happen, where worship happened, where what bothered Jesus was some commerce happened. And so they're looking down into this courtyard, and there's people milling around. There's priests, and there's the stench of sacrifice coming up, and there's maybe even on a good day you see the high priest milling around. There's these people who maybe it'll be their only time in their entire lifetime that they've made it to the temple, and they're dragging along their best sheep, or if they're poor people, they've got this little bird that they're going to sacrifice. There's a wall, kind of almost like a picket fence thing in there, and that determined how far Gentiles could go. Like, so if you're not a Jewish person, you couldn't pass this particular zone. And they're watching these people mill around. And then Satan says, if you're the Son of God, throw yourself down. Jump. If you're God, jump. And then he's like, I noticed last time you had a verse. I got a verse too. And it really is a verse from the Psalms. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. So jump, Jesus. I mean, listen. Like, do you have any idea? This is kind of, if I could elaborate a little bit or suggest the conversation. Like, Jesus, do you have any idea how difficult it is going to be to convince these people that you're the Messiah? I mean, you and I both know when you show up and say, hey, I'm the Messiah, they're going to go, congratulations, there were 40 of them last year and they all died. Like, you and I both know when you show up and you say, hey, I'm your guy, they're going to go, then why is Rome still in charge? You and I both know when you show up, even if you can convince one faction of these people that you're the Messiah, all the other people won't be convinced just because that other faction is convinced. Like, you and I both know this is going to be tough. Hey, listen, Jesus, do you even have any idea how this is going to happen? Like, do you know the details that are coming? I think Jesus' humanness lends itself to the answer of no. Actually, I don't. So you're the Savior, yeah. Do you have any idea how God is going to elicit a following, how God is going to convince people that you are the Savior of the world, that in believing in him, their relationship with God can be restored? Any idea how he's going to do that? Not a clue. Listen, Jesus, we can simplify this. You just jump, and he'll send his angels, because see, I got a verse, and they'll come rescue you, and you'll be like Tom Cruise in 007, just hanging there, just a foot off the ground, like, whoa. And all these people, are you with me on that one? And all these people will be like, wow, that's crazy. Look at those angels. Or maybe the people won't even be able to see the angels, and you'll be like Harry Potter flying around in the courtyard. Everybody will know this guy's something special. Listen, Jesus, it took 700 years for God to even get you here. I mean, he had to find a man, then he had to make a family, and then they had to have kids, and that was a lot of work. And then they had to become a nation, and then they got stuck in Egypt, and that was bad, and then you had to get them out of Egypt, and then they had to get them into the promised land, and that was even more work. And then they got into the promised land, and they had this kingdom, and then they started fighting, and they started getting greedy. And look, it took 700 years for God to even get you here. He can't possibly let something bad happen to you. So let's just eliminate the mystery. Let's just move on with the story. You jump, he'll rescue you, everybody will know. Here's the guy. Here he is. I think the temptation has a lot to do with waiting. It has a lot to do with waiting, and it has a lot to do with the mystery that comes with waiting. Trust, of course. And I think it's a real common temptation. You come up with a plan, find a verse, tell God what he's got to do. Like this temptation, it's to presume upon God. It's to manipulate God. It's to say, God, you got to do this. And I think if we're honest, if you're a God follower, if you're a God-fearer, this is a real common temptation for all of us. Come up with a plan. If you're really spiritual, come up with a verse to go with your plan, and then tell God, like, hey, God, you're graceful, right? Yeah, I'm graceful. Well, come on. Like, hey, God, you said that if I give, then you'll bless me financially, right? Then, okay, then you got to do this. Like, we do it in relationships. We manipulate God's hand. Like, God, I'll do this thing. I'll get myself into this situation. And then, God, you got to get me out because you love me. We can do it in business. In my sector, in the church sector, in quote unquote ministry sector, it happens all the time. You know what it sounds like? Well, we're just going to step out on faith. You know what that often means? We came up with a plan. We found a verse that supports our plan. And now God's obligated to cooperate. Like, it happens all the time. I've done it, haven't you? In fact, I was thinking this week, I know I've told this story before, but when I was 19-ish and new to following Jesus, I had this weird sense that I don't know, that I wanted to do what I'm doing now, and I couldn't quite put all those pieces together. I hadn't been to college, and Lord, how is this going to work out? And I was new to the whole Bible scene and the whole Jesus scene, and so the only thing that really made sense to me was going to Bible school, and so I didn't even really know about Bible school culture, and I went to the store and bought myself some wingtip shoes and some slacks and some collared shirts because the things that I found said I had to wear that stuff. And I found this school in Portland, and it's a great school, and I registered for it. And as I was filling out the paperwork, I got this form back that said that I had to sign this thing, and it said that I hadn't drank alcohol or smoked tobacco in the last 6 months. And I smoked through high school, but had quit prior to 6 months before this. I had stopped drinking, but there was this one night where I was hanging out with some friends, and I don't even think I got drunk, but I had a beer, and I wasn't 19, and I smoked a couple cigarettes, and I remember staring at this form going like, wow, because I've set the stage to do this, but like technically I can't sign it. And I went to, I wasn't all that surrounded by, I suppose, people that would give me the advice that I would like to get, and I went to one of the guys someone in my family, and I just said, like, what do I do here? And with the best of intentions, his response was, well, Adam, sometimes you got to toot your own horn, man. Like, you can't just wait for people to give you opportunity. Sign this stupid thing. And I did, and I got out there, and for lots of reasons, not the least of which I'm a wuss, and that was Portland, and I'm from Billings, it didn't work out, and I came back, and as I was wrestling with this whole presume upon God, it was like, that's it, right? God, there's this area where I want to get to, and I cannot see how it's actually going to happen, but I can see how I can make it happen, and I'll bet you God will forgive me in the process. Like there's this goal, there's this vision, there's this desire, there's this idea. I can get myself there. Probably very few of you are dealing with waiting situations where literally you don't have a next step. It's typically this, like, are you not going to presume upon God? And this tension, it shows up over and over and over again in the text, which tells me that it's common to us. It's still sin, but it's common. Like think of Moses. I love one of my favorite chunks of scripture is Stephen's speech on Moses. Stephen's one of the early martyrs in the church, and before he's killed, he gets to preach essentially at the people, and he offers what the Jews would call a midrash of Moses. And I have no idea what chapter I was going. Oh, there it is. Okay, chapter 7. Now listen to this. When Moses was 40 years old, this part will be familiar, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian, so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Now here's the midrash part. Now it's scripture, but this isn't in Exodus. This is Stephen reflecting to us the Jewish view on what Moses was doing there. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. See, Moses thought, I'll kill one of them, and then everybody else will see what's going on here. See, Moses knew God's got to rescue these people. Moses had a plan. Moses had a plan of his own. But it wasn't God's plan. In fact, it turns out God had another 40 years or so that he was going to wait. It happened to Abraham. You know the story of Abraham, and there's this text that we look at a lot, and we're going to look at it again because I think it's so central to our existence in Genesis 12. God says to Abraham, it's Abram at the time, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Which is why we gather and scatter, because God's deal is like conduit, not reservoir. Like, I'll bless, but the idea is you extend it. Now, God says to Abram, hey, I got this idea. You're going to be a big deal. In fact, people are going to go like, what is there more of? Like sons of Abraham, daughters of Abraham, or stars in the sky? And people are going to go, I don't know, it's a toss-up. And 10 years later, the problem is 10 years later, Abraham doesn't have any kids. And his wife has an idea. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Right? Their story is our story, isn't it? Like the temptation is plan versus presume. Waiting, I think, requires that we embrace the mystery. I think Jesus knew this story. In fact, I think his response demonstrates that he understood the story. He knew the tension that Moses gave into. He knew the tension that Abraham gave into, which is why in verse 7, he says, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Listen, Satan, you got a verse? I got one too. Do not put the Lord your God to the test. Don't do it. Now, context is in the book of Exodus. After the Israelite people have left Egypt, they're wandering around. They reach this one portion of the wilderness called the wilderness of sin, or the desert of sin. Sin is not similar to the way we think of sin. It's just the title. I don't know why I've hiked in it and I didn't ask. But it's parched. There's nothing there. It's like all of they call it wilderness. You would call it desert if you saw it. They get into this desert. They have nothing to drink. Now, people debate about how many people we're talking about. High numbers are 2 million, low numbers are 1, I suppose. I don't know, it doesn't matter. But you've got a lot of people, and they're going, we don't have any more water. And they start to freak out, like you would freak out. And they have 2 options. Option 1 is to go, well, God led us out of Egypt. That was kind of crazy. I bet he can get us water. Let's sing another hymn. Option 2 is they can provoke God. They can taunt God. They can say, God, I thought you loved us. God, I thought you were in control. God, I thought you were good. God, I thought you knew my needs before I even asked. God, I thought. And that's what they do. In Exodus 17, should I just cheat? Yeah, go ahead. No, I'm not going to cheat, but you can put it up there, Sam. As a tribute to Caleb, what he's doing with students, we have an all-student tech booth back there this week. Well, except for Tyler, but 2 out of 3. That's good, right? So they quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Moses replied, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? Now, I'll let you read on your own time how God does meet their needs, but here's verse 7. The text says this, and he called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Now, that's the story of Exodus. In Deuteronomy, as we talked about last week, that's when Moses is recounting to these people, like, don't forget these lessons. And in 6:16, he says, do not put the Lord your God to the test as you did at Massah. See, Satan says, just throw yourself down, get rid of the mystery, come on, let's get on with the show. And Jesus says, no. I know all about this temptation. It's to presume, to assume, to manipulate God's hand. I'm not doing it. I'm instead going to embrace that I see through the glass dimly, so to speak. That I don't quite know what the next step is. And I'm just going to embrace the messiness, the mystery of that. Now, if I could illustrate that for my own life, it's going to take me about 7 minutes to tell you this story. But let's go back to the next lead musician conversation. If you weren't with us 2 weeks ago, I'd invite you to grab that podcast, but we're in a transition of our leadership in the music and arts realm. And as I said a couple weeks ago, in early September, I reached this point of like, institutionalize me, I'm in trouble, this is bad. Panicked. And then, and now you know, like, okay, so we hired this gal, Kate. Let me kind of unpack that for you. In early September, I was in these conversations with a couple of musicians in particular, with all of them, but there were a couple of guys who were really helping me through this process, Jason and John, via email and stuff. And we established early on, all of us, the council and everybody in the conversation, that there were three things we were looking for in that next musician. That they had to obviously be an excellent musician. We take pride in the fact that we like more than three chords. And then that there also needed to be a stylistic fit. And that's part of the tension, is we set out to create something unique musically in church realm, and we did, and that's why hiring the next person was difficult. And then obviously they needed to culturally fit. Well, in early September, in the midst of this, God, what are you doing? Those two guys suggested, hey, Adam, maybe we need to drop the stylistic piece. We learned a new style with Lenny. Maybe we could have fun learning another one. And that was coming from the band. That meant a lot to me, and that was freeing, because essentially they were saying, great musician, and fits with us, let's go, come on, maybe we got to be open to God doing something mysterious here. My words, not theirs. And that caused me to rethink some of the candidates that we had on paper. Because there were a couple guys who had approached, both of them had approached me, who their stuff was excellent. It was just that stylistically, when I originally saw it, I went nah, nope, good, but nope, not us. And so I went back, and one of those guys was a guy in Bakersfield, California. He's a 22-year-old guy, young leader. He had approached us, and his stuff was great. And again, it just wasn't a fit. And so I approached him, and we got him all of our applications and started having all these conversations, and actually had a bit of a phone interview with him. It was about an hour long, and took all that information to the council and went hey, and kind of gave them that context. Maybe God's asking us to loosen our grip on the style piece. And council spent a couple hours on this thing, I think, and it ultimately got to the point of yep, we probably need to bring him to Helena. It's really the next step. How do you know if the guy's going to really be your person, your leader, unless you bring him to Helena? And so we decided that before we brought him to Helena, we needed to make sure that a guy from California has really thought about the implications of moving to Helena, Montana. And so to that end, we sicked Steve Schroeder on them to call him, and really his job was to kind of scare him. Really, Helena, Montana? Really? Can I talk you out of Helena? Because if I can, then great. We'll save ourselves the plane ticket. Well, I set up the phone call, and that following Monday, does it feel like I'm talking fast? Because I feel like I'm talking really fast. On Monday, it's because I'm staring at the clock going, oh, here we go. On Monday, that's when the phone call was supposed to happen. I'm trail running with my wife, and I got a text from Steve hey, Adam, he's not answering my call. And I'm going, oh, geez, I just wasted Steve's time. I'm a loser. And so I get back to him, and I'm texting, and Steve's hey, nope, not answering my text, not answering my calls. I start texting this guy, not answering my calls. On Tuesday morning, still nothing, still no return. So I call Steve, and I'm sorry. I don't like to waste people's time. He's no. And we got in this conversation. Well, what came out in the conversation was, Adam, this was a Slingshot Group candidate, right? Slingshot Group was that organization I talked about that we partnered with to find that next person. Wow, there's a lot of detail. He was a candidate of theirs, but we didn't find him through them, so we weren't on the hook. But nonetheless, there's some common ground there. And what came out in that conversation was, I'll bet you Slingshot would never have thought that we would consider this guy. So we should call them and tell them, here's a glimpse of someone that we were interested in. Anybody else on your list? So I did. I had this great conversation with Tim, is the guy. I think we'll spend some time with him here in the near future, a guy named Tim in Denver, Colorado, leading a church there and also working for Slingshot. Told him all that. He said, great, keep me in the loop. Because he's also, as a professional, going, man, I don't want to place this guy. This is how he treats people, so let me know how this unfolds. Well, what I didn't know is as he was driving home to have, for lunch that day, he was driving home to have lunch with a gal named Kate Plummer, who comes from Sydney, Australia, which is also where Tim is from. He moved here 12 years ago. And that Tim, she was in they played music together when he was there, and what Kate does is she comes to the United States. She's a professional musician. Man, I am not communicating well. She's a professional musician who comes to the United States, for the last 7 years, came to the United States and spent the summer working at a camp in Minnesota. When she's done with her time at that camp, she goes to Denver and hangs out with Tim and his family for a week and plays with the church down there and yada, yada, yada. What I didn't know is as Tim was driving home for lunch that day, he would have this moment with the Lord, and he was just whoa, maybe Kate's that Narrate Church's next musician, and she wasn't a candidate. She wasn't looking for a lead worshiper job. She's an independently wealthy musician from Sydney, Australia. Just kidding. She's a musician from Sydney, Australia that supported herself that way since she was out of high school. She wasn't looking for a church job necessarily. And in my words, his thought was maybe this church is weird enough for her and maybe she's weird enough for them, and I don't know. So he got home and he suggested to her, hey, here's an idea. Maybe you should move to Helena, Montana. She, whoa, what? And he gave her all of our information and said, I don't know, maybe I feel like maybe the Lord might be talking about this, so take their information and pray on it. And, oh, but you can't really do anything yet because they're kind of on the hook with this other guy, and so let's see how that unfolds. Making any sense? Thursday morning, I don't know if I had to have the last word with this guy in Bakersfield or if I was doing him justice, but I had this sense of like, I want to tell him that I don't like what he's doing because he wouldn't answer any of our texts or anything. So I texted him, and here's what it said. I'm guessing at this point that your refusal to answer our texts or voicemails is indicative of your lack of desire to take the position, which is okay, but we could have handled hearing that to our face. I was kind of proud of that one. I copied Tim in Denver on that. He texts me, got an idea out of right field. Is it right field, left field? What field do weird ideas come out of? Left, okay. I played baseball my whole life. I've never understood that analogy. I got an idea out of left field. The type A's are going crazy. Like, would you move on with the story? I said, okay. He said, can we talk? I said, yep. So that afternoon he talked. His first words, I'll never forget. He said, Adam, are you open to a woman? I said, yes. He said, are you open to an Australian woman? I said, all the more. I actually didn't say that. I said, yes. He said, okay. And then he kind of shared all this story with me of like, here's this deal, and there's this gal Kate, and she's at my house, and I told her this, and she's been praying over your stuff, and so she's willing to talk to you on iChat if you want to do that. And so, okay, let's talk on iChat. And so we hung up, and Kate and I connected on iChat, and many of you know, like then we flew her up here, and she hung out with us for a week, and everybody had a great experience with her, felt really good about it, and the council offered her the position in late September. She accepted by mid-October, and so now, okay, so we were worried about hiring a guy from Bakersfield, California. Like, really, Helena, Montana? We've now hired a gal from Sydney, Australia, who saw snow for the first time when she was 18 years old. The whole time she was here, she was like, you guys must be cold all winter. And it was the last day where she went, oh, I get it. You have furnaces in your house. My point is this. It was in this season where I went, oh yeah, because this is when I was personally working through this waiting stuff. Like, waiting embraces mystery too, doesn't it? And that's when all that stuff started to pop off the page of like, whoa, wait a minute. Sometimes waiting involves being open to something that you can't even fathom. Sometimes waiting involves going, Lord, I don't know what you're doing, but as cliche as it sounds, like I'm open to the idea that you could be doing something far different than what I have in mind. Like, waiting can be torture. Mystery can be exacting. But if we're going to wait well, don't we have to go, Lord, I don't really know what you're doing behind the scenes, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Scott McKnight, he tells a story of, Scott McKnight's one of my favorite theologians, and he used to teach at a school in Chicago, and it's a Christian liberal arts school, but only less than half the students there claim to follow Jesus. But every kid there has to take a class called something like The Life of Christ, taught by Scott McKnight, who's no less than one of the best theologians in the world today. He tells a story about, in one of his classes, there was a gal who sat in the very back row who wore all full Muslim garb. I mean, by all appearances, she was a completely Orthodox Muslim woman. She didn't say a word in class. She just kind of stared at her desk and didn't say a word, and you might guess the implication or the assumptions he made. Early on in the class, he assigns a test that's like 360 questions on the Gospels just to confirm that students are actually reading the Gospels. She scored better on it than anybody in the class. A few weeks later, he assigned a paper, and when he received her paper, it was titled The Divinity of Jesus Christ. He thought, wow, this woman really knows her Muslim apologetics. When he read the paper, it was the best paper in the class. He started looking at his computer and realized that she had the best grade overall in the class, and so he stopped her after class one afternoon and said, hey, could we talk? Like, would you be willing to come into my office? And she said, yeah, how about 8:30 tomorrow morning? And he said, I knew she was remarkable when I heard that a college student was willing to meet me in my office at 8:30 in the morning. She sat down and he said, okay, what's the deal? Like, you've got the best grades in the class. And she said, Dr. McKnight, I'm a Christ follower. I have been for a couple years now. Every night when I get home from school, I lock myself in my bedroom and I read my Bible. And when my dad comes home, I hide it. Because Dr. McKnight, if my dad knew that I was a Christ follower, I'd be on a plane for Lebanon tomorrow and you would never see me again. Today, she's, by all appearances, a Muslim doctor in Chicago, but a Christ follower. That story doesn't have anything to do with waiting, but has everything to do with mystery, doesn't it? To just embracing the idea, can we make excuses? Yeah. Can we offer platitudes? Yes. But embracing the idea that God, sometimes it just is unclear. And I don't know what you're doing. And sometimes being a person of faith is embracing that unknown. Listen, I don't know how you're waiting. I don't know how this series is relevant to you. I don't know how you're using it to communicate trust to God. But my challenge to you is are you also willing to acknowledge that God may be doing something much different than you can even begin to imagine? See, I've got my story about Kate, and that'll forever remind me of be open to God doing the unfathomable, because I never in a million years imagined we'd be hiring a woman from Sydney, Australia to move to Helena, Montana and lead us in music. You've got your stories too. Jobs that you received, houses that sold, any number of different stories. In this one, this scenario that you're dealing with now, are you open to the idea that God's up to something more than you can comprehend? Paul said it this way. Go ahead, Sam. He said, now to him who's able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. I think waiting invites us to know the God of the immeasurably more, of the unimaginable. A God who might just surprise you.
For more information on Narrate Church, visit www.narratechurch.org or download the mobile app, now available for iPhone and Android.